Welcome back to the Marvelous Middle-Age Podcast. This week, I'm speaking with Josie Faass. Josie is a mom of two, runs a nonprofit, and has always had a passion for writing. I met Josie last year through Mothers Together, a support community for moms of neurodivergent children. Today, we talk about the unexpected parenting journey we are on and how important support is for parents of older children who are different. We share our thoughts on the joys and challenges we and our children face. We also discuss the book she is in the process of writing about this parenting journey. If you or someone you know is the parent of a neurodivergent child, this is such an important episode. I hope you enjoy my conversation with my friend, Josie Faass. Josie Faass, welcome to the Marvelous Middle-Age Podcast. I'm so excited that you are here.
Nicole, I am so excited too. I've really been looking forward to talking to you.
Well, I tell you, we just poloed this morning, so I feel like I've already talked to you today. We'll get into why we polo each other here in a minute, but every morning we usually all kind of start out and give an update, and so we've already been doing that a little bit this morning. Now we're talking live, which is super fun. I love it.
This is not our normal, but very lovely.
I know. It's great. I love it. Well, before we get started, would you just introduce yourself to everyone, a little bit about your family, what you do, who you are, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So my name's Josie. I live in New Jersey. At this point in my life, I would say almost my entire attention is occupied either by work or by my kids. So I think this is really common for women in particular in middle age, just to find themselves, in the daily grind in a way that doesn't leave a lot of time for anything else. But I do have two wonderful children who we'll talk a little bit about today. And I also run a foundation in Princeton. So that's a lot of time and a lot of attention. The kids are a lot of time and attention. And at the end of the day, it doesn't leave a lot of room for me, which is why meeting you and the other women in our group has been such a godsend. So I'm just really thrilled to get to talk about that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's funny. Most people in my life that I know, I can't pinpoint the date that I met them, but I can with you because how we met was through something called Mothers Together. Mothers Together is something, I started following On the Hard Days, which is a Instagram account run by a woman named Megan Champion. She is the mother of 3 neurodivergent children. And I followed her forever. I don't know if you had started following her on Instagram at all, but she was doing this reel series about what moms of neurodivergent kids wish they could say, but they can't kind of thing. And I resonated with so many of those reels. And I watched her for a long time. And I found out she had this thing called Mothers Together. And I was like, well, what the heck is that? And it turns out it is a way for moms of neurodivergent children to connect in groups and get to know each other and just be a way to create community and support each other, validate each other, communicate with each other about what we deal with as moms, but it's really focused on the mother. And we talk about our kids, obviously, as you and I both know, we talk about our kids all the time, and I thought, oh, that sounds great for somebody else, but that's not for me. Well, I kept following her from afar and just watching her talk about Mothers Together. And I got more intrigued. So I went to like a webinar that she did. It was well attended. There were all these other women on it. And she was talking about what Mothers Together is. And she used the analogy of a house, like a welcoming home. Like it's a place where you can come and be supported and encouraged and relax and have some respite. And I thought, wow, okay. Because I really didn't know anybody. I don't know about you, but I didn't really know many other moms of neurodivergent children well enough that I could talk to them about it. I knew other moms who had kids that were either on the spectrum or ADHD or something, but I didn't know anybody well enough to sit down and have like a really heartfelt, soul-bearing conversation. And so it really appealed to me that this might be a place where I could find some community. And so that's kind of how I found Mothers Together. How did you stumble across it? Was it different than that? Or?
Very different than that.
Mhm.
I'm sitting here listening and thinking, wow, Nicole, that's a really thoughtful way to engage with something. And I think I signed up for our group the day I found Mothers Together. So I'm in a bunch of groups on social media for parents of neurodivergent kids, and kind of have spent a lot of time reading people's posts and commenting and reading other people's comments. And there was a post up from a mother, and she was talking just very explicitly about the struggle that she was in at that moment. And I don't remember the specifics of what she was talking about, but reading the comments, you kind of get your boilerplate, like, yes, this is hard, you can do this, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
One of the comments pointed towards Megan Champion and towards Mothers
Mm.
Together. And she said,
Mhm.
this is a resource you should check out. And I clicked through the link, and immediately we was like, oh, yes, I resonate with this very, very
Oh,
strongly. Like,
great.
her messaging around just being open and honest about the fact that, like, we absolutely love our kids more than anything. And
Mhm.
this is the hardest thing that we've been tasked with doing,
Mhm.
and it's the hardest thing that we've been tasked with doing that we didn't knowingly take on.
Yep.
I think that's a big part of it. Like, yes, many of us plan to be mothers, but this version of parenthood isn't necessarily what we were expecting to be signing on for.
Nope.
So yeah, so I read a lot of Megan's content. I was really resonating with it. And then she posted, about this activity of putting the moms together. And I think it was the last day when you could sign up. And she also had said, like, I'm going to hit pause on the program for a few months.
Mhm.
And I was
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I was like, okay, I don't have to think more about this. I'm just going to give it a go. And so I signed up, and she was great. The email came immediately with what the next steps were. And I remember logging into Marco Polo, which is the app that we use, as to sort of facilitate these conversations. And and you had left a message. You were the first person who had left a message, and you just kind of, I feel like you kind of set the tone of just like, I'm gonna lay it out there and see what happens.
Yeah.
You were super open and really vulnerable. And I was like, okay, I'm picking up what she's putting down. And so
Awesome. Yeah. That's
so
great.
I recorded a message. My first one I actually had to delete, which took some doing because I'd never used the app before,
I had neither.
because I found myself like immediately blubbering, like immediately,
Mhm.
like just, the
Yep.
act of like owning the struggle. And
Mhm.
you know and it's kind of a consequence-free environment, right? Because
Mhm.
it's an asynchronous messaging app. Like, you don't know these people in real life.
Yep.
They don't know your kids. And in the beginning, I mean, I think I
Right.
know now. I feel like I know you all extremely
Yeah,
well.
I know. Me too. Me
um
too. Yeah.
but yeah, so the first message ended, sort of very quickly devolved into tears, which I'm like, okay, this is, yes, I understand that we're supposed to be forthcoming, but maybe this is a bit strong for the first message. So I
Mhm.
like figured out how to delete that
Yeah.
and recorded one, that I can only imagine at this point what it was that I said. But I was trying to basically emulate what you had modeled in terms of like all of the openness and those great qualities of just showing up and saying, you know
Mhm.
what, I'm going to give this an honest go. And I feel like that has been really one of the things that's created this environment that's been so impactful for all of us. Because I think if you had shown up as the first message and had been guarded, or had been trying to kind of like create an image,
Mm.
of like, oh, it's hard, but I've got it kicked or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I think everybody after you would have felt like, okay, that I should replicate
Yeah.
that. And instead it was like, no, I'm going to be real.
Yeah.
And just person after person after person came on and was like, our stories are all different, but I think it all kind of boiled down to, I'm struggling, y'all.
Mhm.
And I need somebody to see me in this struggle. And
Mhm.
that has been it's become such an incredible part of every day for me. And I know we're going to talk more about it, so I don't want to get too in the weeds at this point. But
Yeah.
if I could gift something to probably every parent, every woman in middle age, and certainly every middle-aged mother of a neurodivergent child, it would be a community that brings you
Mm.
that kind of respite and gives you that sense of being seen and being valued.
Absolutely. You articulated it so well. And that's actually one of the many things that I love about you is that first of all, I just love listening to your messages because you just have a way of articulating your thoughts, your comments, everything just so well. It's like reading a beautiful book, like which we're going to talk more about books here in a minute, but
We are.
we are. And it's just you always share things so eloquently, and even when we're having a hard time to get to hear from other moms who, and the other thing I love about it too is I was finding before Mothers Together lots of content from mothers of younger children. So
Mhm.
there's lots of resources, I feel like, for moms of young children who are neurodivergent. Whereas when you get into these teen years, it's a whole nother ball of wax, in my opinion. And there's so many other things coming into play. And the fact that our group, and it was intentionally, Megan intentionally did it this way, was to set us up with moms of children of similar ages. I think the youngest
Mhm.
is maybe about 11. And then my son, I think, is probably the oldest at 16. And it's great, honestly, because if I had to read, I mean, this is nothing obviously against, but if I had to read a child, another child that was 3, it's like,
Mhm.
my kid's not 3. We didn't even know I mean,
Yeah.
I knew something was going on at 3, but I mean, we didn't get the autism diagnosis till he was 13. So, I mean, I needed resources for someone with a child my age at the stage he was in. And so the fact that all of you, we all have kids of similar ages going through kind of some similar things, i.e. puberty, hormones. Oh man, you couple that with
Yeah.
neurodivergence. Woo, buckle up, baby. It's
Yes.
interesting for sure. So that's the other thing I love about our
Absolutely.
group is that we all have kids the same age. And I agree. I mean, I think we all came on, and my biggest concern, honestly, about joining Mothers Together was like, how is she going to take the information I put on that form and pair me with other moms that I'm gonna click with and vibe with? And the
Mhm.
fact that the 7 of us have, I mean, it is nothing short of a miracle. Like, it's a miracle to me, like how well we all connect. And we all, like you said, different backgrounds. We all live all over North
Mhm.
America.
Yeah.
We all
Yes.
have come from different faith traditions and families and stuff and employment and career. And some of us have partners, some are single. So, I mean, we have all these differences, yet we have this one thing that bonds us. And the 7 of us just gelled.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I think what you said about our kids being older, I feel like that's a really important part of it. I mean, I think showing up in this open, vulnerable way was essential. But when you have a young child, like just in general, right? Like everything is so moment to moment and you're figuring it out and you've got sort of the adrenaline push of like being a new mother and, I'm responsible for this other life and like this is a whole new chapter in my life. And when they're neurodivergent, that comes with a huge number of extra things that you have to navigate,
Mm-hmm.
finding doctors and specialists and dealing with the schools and 504s and IEPs and medication and different therapies. And like, there's a whole universe of, challenges that are on your plate. And when your child's young, I feel like you're generally younger, less tired, and it's it's hard, and in a lot of ways navigating that system can be very opaque because
Mm-hmm.
it's not laid out at your feet,
Mm-mm.
but there's a trail of breadcrumbs to follow, right? To like support your child in getting what they need. And so a younger neurodivergent kid, an engaged parent, which everybody wants to be, right? Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
path forward there. And when your kid gets older, that path kind of disappears because you've done the things. You've got the
Mm-hmm.
doctors, you've got the specialists. If you're fortunate, you've got meds worked out. Now I know
Mm-hmm.
we're not all so fortunate. Meds
No.
continue to be something that require attention.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, you've checked the boxes that are checkable, and where you end up is in this place where you have a child who's different in a lot of ways than most of the kids of your friends, and
Mm-hmm.
so you have, I know I can speak for myself, like long-term mom friend who that connection kind of withers because your kids are just on different tracks. It's hard, especially when the relationship was based in, oh, we had babies at the same time, or
Right.
oh, our kids are in the same class. It's hard to keep that alive when your children are diverging. Neurotypical children are doing things much differently than our children. And so it can be very isolating. And, you said earlier about not having people where you felt like you had the confidence, to really confidence in the sense of like shared mutual understanding and everything,
Yeah.
to really speak about your neurodivergent parenting experience fully. And that I think is super true, and as your kids get older, that only becomes more true. And so that
Hmm.
sense of isolation, I think, becomes more and more profound. I know for me, I can only speak for me, but as
Yeah.
I kind of watch my older son's peers, flourishing in sports and academic honor roll and,
Hmm.
yeah, exactly. Like the list goes on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
And our children are astonishingly great at some really cool stuff, right? But
Absolutely.
but a lot of those traditional metrics of success, those aren't metrics that they measure against,
Mm-mm.
and so as your kids age, you do feel more isolated and you do feel more like you just can't connect with other people as directly.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, and puberty is a wild ride under the best of circumstances. And I think one of the things that we've all sort of divined through our shared, conversations is that puberty and neurodivergence are a very heady mix,
Yeah.
that can take you to some places that are far
Yeah.
more challenging in a lot of ways than navigating with a younger child.
Hmm. Agreed. Yeah. And I think to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, I think some of the implications of their choices and their behavior, their performance at school, their performance, I don't mean performance like they're performing, but their
Mhm.
behavior out in the world has bigger consequences. The things they're facing are bigger than when they're younger, right? Like I can just speak for myself with my son, we've had to navigate him driving. I didn't know if he would
Mhm.
be able to drive. I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't know. He is. He's not exactly where we want him to be, but he's making progress. Thinking about his first job, was
Yeah.
this big ordeal, and luckily we have a great program that we work with locally here to help him with that. But these are bigger. It's like big life stuff, right? It's like jobs
Yes.
and driving and thinking about post high school and relationships, dating, things that
Yeah.
when your kids are little, again, not that there aren't hard things about having a younger neurodivergent child, but when they're older, there's mental health
Yeah.
issues
Yeah.
that I think all of our kids kind of have. And so it's just really big, like you said, heady kind of topics and issues that we're facing that I needed moms who could relate to that. And that's what this group has done for me is just like when we get on. And the other thing too, not only can you guys relate to what I'm talking about, but there's no judgment,
Yes. Yes,
because
that's
we
true.
really go in on some stuff our kids are going through and there's no judgment. I feel so safe talking to all of you about stuff that's going on, whether it's with me or with my son or whatever. I know you guys aren't going to judge me. I know you're not going to criticize me. The great thing is sometimes you guys offer just really great suggestions like, oh, have you thought about this? And I know it's coming from this place of like truly, honestly having my best interests in mind or my son's. Like I feel like you guys care and I know I care about all of you and your kids too and I want the best for all of you and I feel that in spades coming back to me when I'm listening to all of you and I can't think of anything else that's just better than that. The feeling safe and not judged cuz our kids, they
Yeah.
do some
No,
stuff.
I completely echo that. And as kids get older, the world becomes harsher on them. The
Mhm.
expectations are more specific and, their peers are less forgiving, I mean, and that's
Yeah.
just human development, that's not particular to neurodivergence, but
Yeah.
a smaller child who's neurodivergent, that there's just a broader range of behaviors that are okay or excusable, or sort of adults and peers look at these things and say, oh, he's a little bit hyper, or, oh,
Hmm.
it's just a more forgiving world. And as they get bigger, a lot of that grace that's extended to smaller children goes away.
Hmm.
And the expectation is, well, you've had enough time to work this out. Like, how can you not,
Figure it
just why?
out. Yeah. Mm.
Exactly. Why are they still doing this stuff?
Yeah.
And like you're saying, I mean, being able to show up and be honest about the fact that, like, yes, my child is 13 or 16 or whatever the age is, the numerical age, but we are on the struggle bus about something that a neurotypical kid probably would have handled, by a much younger age, and we're still legit in the trenches on this.
Yep.
And the advice is great. And one of the other elements of the advice is, I feel like it always comes with the asterisk of, if this isn't helpful, just ignore it, because
Yeah.
one of the things that we know as parents of neurodivergent kids is, like, what works for one child will not necessarily work at all for another. And I know
Right.
that that's true. It's a human thing, right? But it feels especially true with our kids because they have such particular brain chemistry,
Hmm.
and just the way that they see the world and think about the world, the things that resonate with them or turn them off, like, it's so unique to them as an individual. And so often the advice is helpful directly, but it's also just the love that's offered along with it
Hmm.
that's really important.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, because it is, and I always feel that. That's very, you know, palpable for me when I'm listening to all of you and you're sharing and things. I always feel this genuine care and love
Mhm.
and support. And it's not that, and because again, I think for me, the moms that I know have neurotypical children. And so when I
Mhm.
would try to talk to them about things, people, again, I feel totally safe with, but they have neurotypical kids. And so they would, just again, also from a place of love and caring, try to make suggestions about things.
Mhm.
And I feel like I'm always saying, no, like, like, no, that doesn't
Yeah.
work for us. One of the things I always go back to, and this has been the case with my son since he was really small, but the food preferences. And so
Yeah.
he has very particular food preferences. And I would always have people tell me, when he gets hungry enough, he'll eat.
Yeah.
And I would
Oh, yeah.
say,
No, he won't.
no, he won't. You don't understand. The child will starve. Because people would be like, well, you shouldn't be cooking 2 dinners and and
Mhm.
I'm making like a mocking voice, but it's just like, you don't understand. And they can't, right? They don't live in that. But I know if I were to come to you with all that, you're like, yep, get it.
Yeah.
Like,
What 2 dinners did you cook last
yeah,
night? Yes,
right. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
and you
No, yeah.
don't even try, like, well, maybe have him do it. Nope, it's just not. Or like if one of our kids has a meltdown, if they're overstimulated and they're not regulating, and we share, as old as our kids are, they still have them, they
Yep.
do.
Yeah.
And I know if I was to come and talk to you guys about that, you'd get it. You'd be like, yep, happened to
Mhm.
me not too long ago. And I mean, so it's other parents that don't have a 16-year-old that can lose his marbles for some reason because some minor thing that someone wouldn't think was important. You guys get it. Other people
Yeah.
don't get it, and you don't judge it. And so I just so appreciate that. It's just been, and I'm going to put links in the show notes to Mothers Together and Megan Champion's Instagram account, because if you are parenting a neurodivergent child of any age, honestly, but or someone that is, I don't know, I just feel like this has been such a blessing to me. And
Yeah. No,
yeah,
I completely agree. I completely agree.
yeah.
She does a really nice job, and I think there's such a need. There's such a need because
Hmm.
we kind of touched on already the logistics of parenting a neurodivergent child are in some ways kind of structured, and you can learn them, and you can work your way through that system, and hopefully you end up with a set of different supports and interventions that make things easier, right?
Right.
Um, but you as a person, as a mother in our case, you're not part of that equation.
Mm-mm.
The priority necessarily is the child, and that
Right.
is 100% right. And in a way, women in middle age, mothers, I mean, our identity, our preferences, our identity just becomes collateral damage in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of ways. And
Yep.
I think that's even more pronounced when you have a neurodivergent child, because all of the inherent messaging around self-sacrifice as a mother, and a woman sort of leaving reproductive years and what that means for who we are in society, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's even another layer of, and your child has special needs, and therefore you exist to meet those needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think,
Yep.
Mothers Together, our group, places where women in that position can find one another and give each other the support that you can only give if you have lived this, if you have
Mm-hmm.
walked in these shoes.
For sure.
There's such a need there. And that our little group, Mothers Together, like, that's great, and it isn't nearly enough. It
Yeah.
isn't nearly enough. So
Exactly.
I'm really glad that you're doing this podcast on middle age in general for women, because we don't get enough time to talk about this stuff. Like, I feel like when we hang out as girlfriends, it's the only thing we talk about, pretty much, whether it's us or other friend groups. But for it to be formalized and in the light of day, and not just, around a glass of wine, or, whatever, in these kind of informal circumstances, like, that needs to happen. We deserve for that to happen. And so I'm really glad that you're doing this, and that we get to talk about this topic in particular.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. And that was kind of one of the things, that appealed to me about Mothers Together, is about the mother, right? It's about the
Mhm.
woman. It's about, us and our role. Yes. And all the things that we do, for our children, and the focus of providing supports and resources and all the things we do for our children. But it really is, the intent of it is to focus on us and our well-being and what we're going through, because we
Mhm.
spend so much of our time on the child, which, again, we would all do it, and we do it every day, and we'll do it, and we're going to continue to do it. But then at what sacrifice sometimes it usually becomes of ourselves. We're sacrificing our own well-being, our own, you know, care of
Mhm.
ourselves. And so one of the things I love about our group is that we are also really good, I feel like, about encouraging each other. Some of us, doing, whether it's, exercising or getting away for the weekend, or doing something with friends, or some other type of self-care. And
Mhm.
we really encourage each other in that. And I like that we support each other in that. And so for you specifically, when you think about our group and what this has been like, how has it just, you kind of started going into it a little bit, but how has it benefited you? I mean, not just as a mother, but as a woman, as a, we're in the midst of midlife here. How has it specifically benefited you? We've talked about some of this already, but if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah. In a lot in a lot of ways. Having that space, just having that space set aside, that is for me, for us, but I'm
Hmm.
speaking from my perspective. So for me to come and share the things that, honestly, it's the mundane of life, right? That we can bring to the group and say, "Hey, I'm really struggling, y'all. Like, I couldn't sleep last night, and my kids were fighting this morning." And it's like, where who outside of our group, where we've
Yeah.
decided to show up for each other, like, who the heck cares? Like, "Oh, you didn't sleep last night? Me either." Big freaking deal. So knowing that that space is there, especially in those super, super hard moments, I'll find myself, like, when there's something super challenging, in my mind, I'll say, "Well, I can talk to the moms about this.
Hmm.
I can talk to the badass women about this," which is
Yes,
what we
that's what our group is
call
called.
ourselves.
We call ourselves the Badass Women.
Yes, and I think we very much deserve that title. But it just, even in the hardest moments, I don't feel alone because I know that I can bring it to the group, and I know that people will listen,
Mhm.
and I know that people will respond specifically to what I'm talking about. So it takes the edge off. It has taken the edge off of the hardest times, and honestly, the things that bring me joy, I have the extra joy of knowing that I get to share that and that there's people who will care, and
Mhm.
it will bring you all joy as well.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something really to there's something profoundly meaningful about being able to show up for other people. You know,
Mhm.
it's not just about it makes me feel this way or it elevates my mood or makes my hard times not so hard. The act of simply holding space for someone else is incredibly, fulfilling
Mhm.
for everybody, for everybody. I think for women in particular, it isn't a labor to listen to someone else's problems or to cheer them on when something is going well. It is actually, you know, it does good for my soul as well. And I think, that that's something that I guess was less like when I entered the group, it was because I was coming from a place of depletion, right? We talk a lot
Mhm.
about trying to pour from an empty cup. And you can't do that, right? And
Right.
we all kind of bump up against that reality regularly in our daily lives. And I think most people do. Um, so I was coming from a place of like, I am just a dried up husk of a human being at this moment, and I just need something to fill my cup and let me know that I'm seen in my brokenness. I'm seen in my, partial
Mhm.
successes. I'm seen in my utter failures. But what I didn't expect was how much it would benefit me to do that for other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a surprise. Like in a way it's been a surprise, and then in a way it's kind of a intellectually coming home. Of course it feels good to show up for other people. Like we're humans are social animals, and
Mhm.
we need that connection. And especially given our personal identities as parents of neurodivergent children, those personal connections, they're extra hard. They're extra hard. Because our attention is taken by our kids and everything else that's demanded of us, because our experiences don't align with so many other people's experiences, because of modern life and, phones and screens and all of that stuff. And it just, and in middle age, many of us are working outside the home.
Yep.
Many of us are in relationship with another adult who also demands,
Yep.
care and feeding and our attention.
Yeah.
There's just a lot. We're just really stretched thin.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I'm rambling. I've forgotten the original question.
No, all the
What has
benefits.
it
Yeah. I
been
mean,
brought?
this is, you're getting right to it. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it, the other thing that being part of the group has done for me is that it has in listening to other people's problems, in giving advice or support, I find that it's easier to show up for myself when I'm not in the group. So I know what you all would tell me. When my cup is empty, I can feel it, and before it was just my own internal like, okay, no, I've just got to put my head down and get through this and do these things.
Right.
And now I hear you or one of the other moms in the group saying, "You know what, girl, just take a nap," or like, "That can wait. This is not the end of the world. Be realistic about what's going on." And like, you can't you can't sacrifice yourself to save everybody all the time. You won't
Mhm.
survive that. And so
Mhm.
it's just been wonderful. And, in terms of takeaways, I think one of the major ones is how similar the fundamentals of our experiences are.
Mhm.
So it's being seen in the moment to moment. And it's also the recognition that what previously had been this very isolated existence is in fact being mirrored. And I know that this extends beyond our group. I
Mhm.
know there are women and fathers too, I'm sure, and other caregivers of neurodivergent children who are living this exact type of reality that we are. Because I'm not a mathematician, but I think
Mhm.
the odds of us all experiencing versions of this same life, as you said, all over the world and in all different time zones and from all different religious and political and backgrounds and all of these things, that's not possible. And that tells me, not only are we not alone, none of us are alone in this experience. And so that's why things like Mothers Together and, opportunities for us to find those shared experiences are so incredibly important.
I completely agree. Yeah, I have the exact same perspective that you do. I know I can come to all of you and you guys will encourage me and support me and you know what I'm going through. And I can share, like you said, something like, I know I'm depleted. I know I'm wiped out. But if I come to all of you, you'll affirm that, hey, Nicole, you need to take care. You need to do something for you. And that is, I might be thinking that for myself in my head, but I won't act on it just because of myself thinking it. But hearing someone else echoing it back to me is really, really powerful. We were talking about this group and being parents of neurodivergent children, and that I'm sure have both had experiences with parents of neurotypical children who try to, support us, legitimately, or counsel us or whatever. And I think our group, we also talk a lot about, whether it's school experiences or experiences our kids have in extracurricular activities or whatever. And there's, parents of neurotypical children in those settings. There's parents of neurodivergent children in those settings. Thinking about kind of both sides of the coin. So if you were talking to parents of a child who's just found out they're on the autism spectrum, or they have ADHD or Tourette's or whatever the case may be, is there anything you would tell those parents just based on your lived experience so far? Anything you would just want them to know? Because I think about that a lot. Like, I'm sure there might be people listening here that maybe have had a grandchild, maybe, for example, or a child newly diagnosed. What would you want them to know about being the parent of a neurodivergent child?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, I think, like specific advice in terms of navigating the world of neurodivergent parenting. But I think fundamentally, the thing that I would want someone to know is sort of more of like a baseline understanding. A diagnosis doesn't change who your child is.
Mm-hmm.
It puts language to what you have been observing. A diagnosis can be really devastating. Especially the first one, or the sort of like the first formalization of, because as a parent, you can tell, you can tell your child better than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And like, even as a first time parent, very early on, like with my son, and who I love like nothing else, right? But I remember having thoughts of like, is this really normal? This feels like really super extreme. And,
Mm-hmm.
so getting that first diagnosis, and for him, the first diagnosis was of ADHD. In a way, it's really heartbreaking, because it's this codification of my child is different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the way to look at that is, it's still your child. It's still the same child that you
Right.
tucked in the night before.
Yep.
Nothing has fundamentally changed about your child. The other thing that, and so try to take from a diagnosis the good. And the good is, the diagnosis gives you a way to understand your child better. It doesn't change who they are, but it gives you a roadmap for not just the underlying sort of causes for what you see manifested in behavior, but for the mechanisms. And by understanding the mechanisms of the way that their brains are working or working differently,
Mm-hmm.
you can then support them in ways that are going to be vastly more effective than just trying to take a neurotypical lens and like apply it on
Mm-hmm.
super high level, which is what the world kind of tells you to do, especially in the absence of a diagnosis.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. And then even more fundamentally than that, I would encourage parents who have a new diagnosis to really spend some time with the fact that neurodivergence is not a value statement. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's, our children's brains are different than maybe in my case than mine. I think in your case than yours. They
Mm-hmm.
function very, very differently. And that is going to mean that your parenting experience will be different than if they were neurotypical. It's going to mean that you will, quite frankly, be left scratching your head a lot of the time trying to navigate what it is that your child is reacting to, or sort of what is causing the behaviors that you're seeing, that will be difficult as a neurotypical person to really understand. But they are not worse, they are not
Mm-hmm.
bad, they're not
Right.
they're it's different.
It's different. Yeah.
um
Mm-hmm.
it's different, and it's taken me, not that I ever looked at my son and was like, oh, he's worse, he's not. But it's taken me a long time to really kind of profoundly come to terms with the fact that this is a difference, and it's a difference for life. You're
Right.
not going to accommodate your child out of neurodivergence.
Right.
You're not going to discipline them out of it or encourage them out of it or
Mm-hmm.
anything. No matter what you do, they will always be neurodivergent. And so your actions really need to be through a mindset of, I am trying to create and help my child create a path through this world that they can walk,
Mm-hmm.
because the world is built for neurotypical people,
Right.
and it's built for neurotypical people from A to Z. There is no part of our world, and school is a wonderful example of this, that has neurodivergent people in mind whatsoever.
Right.
um, and as just a little aside, the reward system for our world is not built for neurodivergent people. And we
No.
talk about this a lot in our
Yeah.
group. The accomplishments that our children have, and they can be really stunning. I mean, we talk a lot about hyperfocus, and that
Mm-hmm.
is something that many, many neurodivergent folks have, which is this ability to delve into something they care about to a degree that a neurotypical person just
Nope.
can't fathom, right?
Right. Right.
Um, with my son, it's reptiles and amphibians. I
Yeah.
know with Nathan, it's completely different, right? It's like
Yeah.
World War II vessels
Yes.
and all sorts of
Titanic
other
and
things.
all.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But like that, if we had the right kind of eyes to see it, we collectively, we would be in awe of these people
Oh,
and what they're capable of. But the world doesn't see those things,
no.
and school certainly isn't built to recognize and foster those things. And so, as a parent who's just received the diagnosis, it's a lot. Give yourself space to feel the feelings that you're feeling. There are no wrong feelings. Like,
Right.
it's uncharted territory as an individual. And I think as a society, we really have not done any of the work to normalize this or really create a framework that people can comfortably navigate post diagnosis. So you're not wrong to feel whatever you're feeling.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think it's about finding a place as a human being where you can do your best work in life in supporting your child, in supporting yourself. And for me, an important part of that was coming to terms with the fact that my child is different. He's not broken.
Mm-hmm.
He's in some ways incredibly more gifted than anybody else I know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and how do you return to that knowledge when things get tough? Because things do get tough,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Absolutely. So you said that so well. And I felt all of those and experienced all of those things. And yeah, when times are tough, remembering the gifts that our children have, and because you're going to have the tough times, right? As we know, those times are going to come. They're going to come frequently. They're going to come when you expect them and when you don't expect them. And remembering that this child is the same child that they were before the formal diagnosis, and
Mhm.
that they're not in any way, shape, or form broken or not the whole
Yeah.
child, right? That they were intended and created to be, and that we we are blessed. Even though I have to remember that sometimes it's a little harder than others, but it just to get to be a part of their world and get to be welcomed in, because I think sometimes as moms, we are their safe space to land. We are the ones they come to, right? With the hard stuff and the big stuff. They also take out the hard stuff on us sometimes when they're not happy. We are also
Yeah.
kind of that sometimes for our kids, but we're also the ones a lot of times that they come to, when they're struggling with something or they need to talk about something. And that's a gift too, in and of itself. And
Yeah.
so as moms,
Yeah.
you have to take that with also with the tough times, the tough stuff
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
one other thing that I've really been with both my kids recently picking up on is, I think because we're not in their shoes, there's a lot of feeling like we have to be the conductor of their life, and we have to, head things off the pass, and we have to figure out when natural consequences are, should be kicking in. But they're a human just like we are, and they are in the world just like we are. And where we're seeing the world rejecting them in a lot of ways, they're feeling the world rejecting them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's another thing to really keep in mind. Like, it's very super easy for me, and I think for a lot of people, to get in the headspace of like the fixer, or the, sort of the person in charge, the neurotypical person who has to make all this stuff happen, right? And
Right.
it's easy to lose sight of the fact that, like, our kids want the same thing that every other person on the planet wants. They want love. They want to be seen. They want to express themselves. And they're up against
Mm.
so many obstacles because the ways that they function are just different.
Right.
So I think a lot of, and this is something when, you were talking about how where there's safe space, and that can sometimes lead to being, kind of the people who get the worst of it.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely true. And what I've been trying, not always successfully, but
Me
in my
neither.
head, really trying to keep in mind that when that lashing out happens, when that kind of, I don't have anywhere else I can express these big emotions, and so I'm going to express them in your face. When that happens, that's pain, that's pain
Mm-hmm.
showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And as hard as it is, especially given everything else that we are tasked with doing, like, if we can try to hold space for that and try to not further the harm that the world's put on them in terms of the judgment and the, oh, you're not like the rest of us and you're not
Right.
quite right. They get that message, So to the
Yeah.
extent that we can hold up their strengths and affirm for them that they're the same things that our group does for us, right? That
Yeah.
they're seen, that they're valued, that they matter. Um, I would just, for person receiving a diagnosis, just trying to have that as something that you come back to throughout time. And you won't always be able to hold that idea. I can't. I don't know anybody who can. But
Mm-hmm.
to try and to have that as kind of an aspirational goal of, I recognize that this is necessary, that this is, I'm called to do this in addition to all the other things.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm been nodding my head. I'm going to have a neck ache here. I've been nodding my head along with everything that you're saying. To kind of take this then one step further. So you are writing a book
I
about
am.
parenting a neurodivergent child, and you've been sharing parts of that with our group and things as you've been working on the book. Share a little bit about why you're writing the book. How did that idea kind of come to you, and who the book is for, kind of what your goals are for the book. Just share a little bit about that and what that process has been like so far.
Absolutely. So this is definitely a passion project. It is in no way related to my professional life at all. But basically, the idea for the book really came out of our group discussions. So my background is, I'm trained as a researcher. I have a PhD in public policy. So a lot of my sort of professional experience, and I'm a qualitative researcher specifically. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my professional experience has been in a space of focus groups and surveys, and sort of how do you divine from people's narrative responses, kind of trends and themes that are pretty durable, right? And not specific to a person, but more generalizable. And so the group, I mean, immediately the group gave all the benefits that we've already talked about, of feeling seen and heard and affirmed. And but what I started to recognize very quickly in our discussions, and we all did, this was certainly not some revelation that I was alone in having, but our experience are so common. The specifics are, maybe not, like, your son loves ships, my son loves snakes, that there's a difference there. But your son is, probably the most knowledgeable person on the planet about the ships that he cares
Mm-hmm.
about. And I could say about the same thing for my son about snakes.
Yeah.
So as soon as you kind of zoom out from the granular details of our experiences, you start to see these very distinct themes forming. And essentially, what the goal of the book is to bring our experience to a readership of probably mostly other mothers, because I am aware like there's things that we have in common. We all identify as female, we're all white.
Mhm.
So there's certainly, despite our many differences, there are
Mhm.
some fundamental similarities.
Mhm.
So I don't want to claim that our viewpoint, our experience is necessarily just universal for everybody,
Mhm.
although I think there's definitely elements of it that will be.
Mhm.
So I think the primary target is probably mothers of neurodivergent children. Um, but what the book seeks to do is to bring this sense of being seen and understood and in community to people, even if they can't, find a group like this for themselves. And I sincerely hope that they can. But the way that I'm seeking to do that is essentially through the course of our many months of very long and detailed conversations, I've come up with essentially an index of topics that I feel we have all chimed in on, all affirmed for one another. Yes, this is real. I'm also
Mm.
experiencing this. This is what it looks like in my life. So identifying those things, and it could be something as, sort of tactile as a meltdown and dealing with a meltdown. It could be something as sort of pervasive and all encompassing as feeling isolated,
Mhm.
as a parent. And I think at this point, the index probably has, oh, I don't know, over 30 individual topics in it.
Mhm.
And so I'm organizing those into chapters. And basically, the idea is to introduce the reader to this notion of this as a part of our experience and couple that with some stories that are specific to us as parents. Like
Mhm.
my child had a meltdown in IKEA that resulted in vomit across half of the dining hall, right? Like that's actually true.
Yeah.
Um, but it's supposed to be humorous. It's supposed to be as lighthearted as something like this can be. But because what we were talking about pre-finding one another, this sense of, am I alone in this? Is this just
Mhm.
totally like, is my experience like sideways to everybody else's? The purpose of the book is to say, no, it isn't. Your experience is actually exactly like mine and hers and hers and hers, right? And I think there's a lot of strength and solace that comes from just knowing I'm not alone. And I
Mhm.
think so that's been a big part of the benefit of our group. And then the other part, and I know we use this phrase a lot, you are the mother that your child needs.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the sort of companion message to, you're not alone, and you are the person who's meant to be doing this, and you can do this. Not perfectly every day. You are not going to show up and feel like you are hitting it out of the park day in and
Right.
day out. That's not realistic, but I think, like we've been talking about, people in our position, especially as our kids get older, you feel like you've kind of fallen by society's wayside. And so the purpose of this book is to say, no, you haven't. About 20% of children come up with a neurodivergent diagnosis before age 18. 20%, like that's 1 in 5. That's
Yeah.
huge,
It's a lot.
you know?
Mhm.
So I think what we experience is a common experience. And I've also I do have some other mom friends who have neurodivergent children. And since we've all started having these very open conversations, I've decided, well, I'm just going to start broaching this with other people. And what I find is that, there's initially like, oh, wait, are we allowed to talk about this? But then
Right.
very quickly, it's like, oh my God, yeah, me too. So I feel like this book is not, it's not an advice book. It is not, I mean, yes, there's a little bit of advice peppered in, but
Right.
again, always with the caveat, like we bring to our discussions of, if this helps, great. And if it doesn't, ignore it completely,
Right.
because this is coming from a place of, this shit is hard.
Yeah.
You are doing the best that you can. And
Yeah.
so that's really the intent of the book, is to give people what may be, honestly, just given my own experience, the first inclination that they're not alone in the details, in the sort of the moment to moment. You're not alone,
Mhm.
and you are enough. So it's intended to be funny. There's curse words in there
Yeah.
because I curse a lot, as I just demonstrated. Um, but it's really meant to just be a step along the way to normalizing our experience, our children's experience. This is we're coming from a sort of a place of like non-existent support in the areas we're talking about.
Mhm.
this book is intended to be part of that conversation. I mean, no individual can carry this conversation alone. Not me, not Megan Champion, not any of us, right?
Right.
Nor should we. This is really meant to put some daylight on some of the stuff that has been in the dark for so long and really take away the isolation and honestly some of the shame.
Yeah.
I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody follows Brene Brown, right? So we know
Mm-hmm.
we know guilt is I did something bad and shame is I am bad, right? And
Right.
I think that neurodivergence and neurodivergent parenting often comes with a heaping helping of shame, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
shame about, my child is different. And I would absolutely push back on that with no hesitation whatsoever.
Right.
I don't think shame has any part in that discourse, but shame about I am not doing this well enough. And I think that's the burden that so many of us carry, and so this is really meant to say, screw that. You are
Mm-hmm.
kicking ass. Like you are up against odds that are incalculable. And you are kicking ass. And that's kind of
Yes.
the bottom line is I want to bring as much as can be brought from a person to person conversation to people who can't be in that conversation. And I also honestly want to hopefully be one of the people breaking open this conversation more broadly because I think, there's a lot of ways in which society is completely unfair to particular segments of the population, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot about some of them.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one that I don't think really gets a lot of attention. There's
Mm-mm.
some holdouts that we collectively have decided, well, we don't really have to look over there because that's
Right.
genuinely, yeah, that's less than.
Yeah.
And I would argue that neurodivergence and that parenting and you know being in the lives of neurodivergent people is something that we have yet to really just own that this is
Mm-hmm.
normal. This is
Right.
normal. This is 1 in 5, guys. This is
Yeah.
1 in 5. Like
Mm-hmm.
the fact that there's any kind of lack of transparency or any kind of shame or otherness to this is frankly ridiculous. So I think that this is long overdue. I think your work with the podcast, doing the same thing around women in middle age, like I think it's, you
Mm-hmm.
know what? It's time. Like it's time. Generations before us, they did other work. I really think that this work is falling to us and like, let's do it. I think it's time.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Amen. I completely, wholeheartedly agree. And I've had an opportunity to take a sneak peek at some of what you've started writing. And my first thought was, gosh, I wish I would have had this when I got Nathan's diagnosis. And it's going to be such an incredible resource and encouragement and blessing to so many people. And I can't wait for you to put this out into the world, however that may happen, because I think, like you said, 1 in 5.
Mhm.
There are lots and lots of parents out there who are in the same boat as we are that will benefit from knowing they're not alone, that you are doing a great job. Your child is who they are, and you're the parent that your child needs. And this book is going to do that and so much more. And so I can't wait when you're getting ready to launch the book. I definitely want to have you back on because I want to talk more about that and that process as well. And I can't wait for this and just to be a part of the experience that you have as you're writing and getting to look at the content and the topics. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the topics, I mean, there's so much. And I think that's part of it, the conversation too. It can feel so overwhelming when you're
Yes.
parenting a child like ours, and to have a resource like this where I can, oh gosh, this is happening. I can pull that chapter open and read and resource myself with information and just assurance, right? That, okay, this happened. I'm not alone. This happens to other parents and other kids. And, I
Mhm.
mean, that's something that I'm sure all of us, if we think about our group, just our group, just the 7 of us wish we could have had.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
going to be amazing. I can't wait. I'm so excited.
I'm also really excited, which you know that something you're meant to do something when you find yourself, you know, before you fall into bed thinking, oh, I could just do 10 minutes. Like
Yeah.
I just wanted you don't have to force yourself. You
No.
just want to do it.
Right.
Um, so yeah, no,
Exactly.
I'm very excited. I'm just it's honestly, it's such a cool thing to be able to kind of have these relationships and then recognize like, wow, I have benefited so incredibly. I want to pay it forward. And I think we all want to pay it
Mm-hmm.
forward. I think that's one of the things I think that also really connects the group is, everybody has been on the struggle bus and has a permanent assigned seat on the struggle bus,
Yeah,
right? But we want to help each other through that. And I think we want to help other people through it as well to the best of our ability. And so, I think that's kind of that's the motivation for doing this. And I hope that it comes through in the book. And, I hope it is the start of a bigger conversation.
me too. I think it's amazing. And yeah, like I said, I can't wait. And again, we'll definitely have another episode when all of this book stuff starts launching because it's going to be exciting. I
Absolutely.
cannot wait. Well, this conversation, I think we could probably talk all day long, and we kind of do sometimes on Marco Polo. Sometimes we're on it on and off throughout the day, depending on
Very
what's going
true.
on. So, but I think we could talk all day about this. Again, I think it's just a topic that, like you said, is not really out there into the world like it needs to be, and it is a group of people. Our kids are ones that have kind of been left not as well addressed as others, and we as their parents can hopefully play a role in championing them and advocating, and we all do that every day anyway, but
Yes,
for the
yes, we
broader
do.
conversation, I think our conversation today and others that we'll have in the future are a piece of that and a part of that, and your book will be absolutely a huge component to that as well. I always like to ask every guest a couple of questions as we wrap up the episode, just to reflect, because this podcast is about, we are both in the midst of midlife. We
Yes.
are parenting children. We're also, in lots of different, whether it's, career stages, and have older parents, and we have lots of different things going on in our lives outside of our kiddos, believe it or not. There's a lot going on that we all have. But I like for guests to kind of reflect a little bit about this stage. And we know there's challenges. We know there are hard things about being in this stage. But on the other side of that, if you had to say, what is something that for you has been one of the best things about being in midlife so far?
So I think this is for me, and I've heard other people definitely echoing or saying similar things. I think by midlife, you're just more comfortable in your own skin. I feel like, I can speak for myself. When I was younger, I really felt this just urgent need to respond and match respond to what other people expected, match what they were doing,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of compete on this playing field that I thought we all had agreed was how we were going to be measured in terms of our worth, our success, our, you know, yeah, our, who we are as people. And I think
Mm-hmm.
as I've aged, partly the world has changed around me, and this is something that I'm also really starting to see very clearly, especially as my older son is getting older himself and sort of mirroring current culture to me, and I don't recognize it. He's
Mm-hmm.
using slang that I don't know. He's using,
Oh,
social media platforms that I have no interest in. And a younger me, I think, would have been very panicked by this, or I would have felt the need, like, okay, let me get, like, I'm on the outs with society. I'm like, I got to figure this out. Younger me or older me hears those things and says, "Oh, that's cute."
yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So kids today don't wear jeans. Cool, I do.
Yeah.
I think there's a confidence that comes with being older and just knowing who you are, and there's some comfort in seeing the world march on beyond you, and
Mm-hmm.
just, I am not the center of everything. Like, I
Yep.
can be better at some things, worse at others. I may never dot those I's or cross those T's. And ultimately, the universe will continue on. And so it gives a lot of freedom, um, to just do the things that you can do and care about the things that you do care about.
Mm-hmm.
Because in sort of shifting the focus away from yourself, you also shift the burden away.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of freedom in that. And not every minute, this is a process. I'm definitely moving in this direction. I don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
I'm at that destination yet, but it's definitely been a distinct part of entering middle age is this both recognition of myself as part of an infinitely complex, always changing universe, and just the freedom that comes from not having to be everything to everybody and compete on every front. I'm perfectly fine with not ranking in many areas of life if I can focus on the ones that do matter to me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Absolutely. That is amazing. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And lastly, if you could go back to
Mm.
Josie in her 20s or in that earlier stage of life, what would you tell Josie about middle age? What would you want her
Oh,
to
about
know?
middle age. I think I would try to impress upon myself that what I want and need matters.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, I was a people pleaser. I was trying to, like I just said, kind of follow trends and, be in with other people. And it caused me to do some things that weren't centering what actually mattered to me. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that if I had made different choices and sort of been truer to my own internal compass, those earlier years would have been easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to fake it. It's hard to fake it. And even if you're totally committed to kind of those external metrics, it never quite feels genuine. And so I don't regret anything. Oh, I'm sure I regret something, but generally speaking, I really
Right.
don't regret life choices or anything along those lines. But I do look back at a younger version of myself and have some pity just for my inability to give myself grace, to give
Mm-hmm.
myself importance in my own life. And I know that I'm not alone in that. I think a lot of young people struggle with that. I think a lot of young people who identify as women in particular struggle with that because we receive so many messages about our appearance and our worth being, relative to how some external force is valuing us. And it's really hard when you're new in the world to say, no, actually, what matters is these set of things that I know matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would try to just tell my younger self to give myself grace, and
Yeah.
also just to embrace being young and healthy and have the world in front of me and not so caught up in, am I fat? Is my makeup right? But
Mm.
those like little details that ultimately matter not at all. I look at pictures of myself when I was young, not often, but when I do, and I can usually remember the moment it was taken. And I know that on that day, I probably woke up and felt ugly or felt fat or was upset because I was
Mhm.
having an issue with a boyfriend who I no longer have any connection to whatsoever.
Right.
All these things that mattered so much. And honestly, like, I allowed to downgrade my experience of life that just ultimately didn't matter at all.
Yeah.
So again, it's sort of that's the flip side of the coin of the beauty of midlife is that you can look back at the before times and see, oof, okay, didn't do that quite right.
Yeah.
But also look back and give that person grace because I know I was doing the best that I could at that time. I
Absolutely.
just didn't have the lived experience or
Hmm.
the wisdom to the extent that I have any wisdom at all, but to know to do better for myself.
Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Well, this has been amazing. I think we could probably talk for hours and hours and hours about this topic. And I would love to have you back as you're preparing to, put the book out into the world and talk more about that
Absolutely.
process. And can't wait to read more as you're writing and drafting and going through that process as well. But Josie, I just want to really thank you for being on the podcast today. And I know that there are going to be people out there that are going to listen to this, whether they're parenting a neurodivergent child or they know someone that is, that are going to be really blessed by our conversation. So thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for having me on and also just for your friendship and,
Mhm.
for being part of my life and making it so much better.
I agree. Thanks to you too. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow the show to make sure the latest episode is on your podcast feed each week. I would greatly appreciate a rating and a 5-star review on the podcast platform you're listening on. It helps others to find the show. If there are topics you'd like to have discussed on the show, please email me at themarvelousmiddleagepodcast@gmail.com. The Marvelous Middle Age Podcast is produced by Riley Mullane and is part of the Ananellis Studios Network.